I'm Susan Allen, Benefits Coordinator with the Greene County Council on Aging.
I'm Dave Cusack of Cusack Law Office in Beaver Creek, Ohio.
We'd like to invite you to join us for our legal chat, brought to you by the Greene County Council on Aging. So Dave, can you tell me a little bit about guardianship? I know I have people who did not do planning ahead, and now mom or dad is totally incompetent. What do they do?
Yeah, so when we think about a guardianship is a probate court process by which a person, or it could technically be an entity, so sometimes we have a social services kind of organization that does that, but they are named to make the decisions for the health care or the finances or both of a person who's no longer competent.
So what does it mean to be incompetent?
When the context of a guardianship application, a person is incompetent when by virtue of some mental health or physical health circumstance, they're no longer able to make their own decisions or protect themselves, and therefore the court requires intervention to protect them on their own behalf. The process involves determining if the person is incompetent. It usually requires an expert statement from a medical professional. There's a hearing. The person is provided notice, the person who would be the ward that's alleged to be incompetent.
So you have to sit there and listen to them say you're incompetent.
Yeah, technically, but to be honest with you, in the practical world, that doesn't happen that often. The person doesn't often choose to attend, either because they don't remember or they just are not capable or they're not interested. But so the process involves asking the court to find that the person is not competent, and then that there's a finding that there is no less restrictive means to care for this person. So if I have a health care power of attorney, but you don't know about it, you file for a guardianship so you can make health care decisions for me, and then ultimately if you find this healthcare power of attorney, unless there's something about the person I've named or the circumstances that would make that unsafe for me, that would be a less restrictive means than the court supervising my healthcare decisions. So in that case, the court would not grant a guardianship. They would say that document satisfies.
So it is really then up to the court.
Correct. So if you're going to apply to be guardian for someone, typically you have to be a resident of the state of Ohio. Since we're talking about Ohio law here, there are occasions where a relative could potentially file for guardian of the person and not be an Ohio resident. But for finances, always has to be a resident of the state of Ohio. And most often the court's going to want that person to be, even for the guardianship of the person, to be a resident of the state of Ohio.
And is that person in your experience typically in a nursing home, or are they at home sometimes, or?
Yeah, they're at home sometimes. It depends. So sometimes we have someone who is healthy enough to be at home and with certain protections in place cannot be a danger to themselves. But when they go to the doctor, they can't direct their own health care. Or when it comes to finances, they can't make their own decisions. They can't pay bills, and nobody can access their funds. So in that case, the person could be home, but a lot of times it is somebody who's in a nursing home. Yeah.
So what kinds of things, let's say I can't get a guardianship, and now this person is making their own decisions, and really they shouldn't be. What happens?
Yeah, so so sometimes we have people who are in that gray area, right? They're not necessarily incompetent, but we see a kind of a little decline in their ability to make healthy decisions for themselves. That's tough for the courts and everybody, because we don't want to take away someone's free will because they're not making the decisions we would want to make for them. But we want to.
That's a tough one. We see all the time. The family's like, "Why can't you do something?" Well, they're competent.
Right. Yeah, I had a case that the family came to me and they had called Adult Protective Services, and they say, Mom won't communicate with us. The Adult Protective worker, Adult Protective Services caseworker, went out to the home, and they could see that she hadn't cut her lawn all year, that all these things happened. But she expressed an understanding of what's going on. She said, I don't want to cut my lawn, and I don't want to talk to those people. And
Wow.
she was in a situation where she was making choices nobody in the family would want her to make, but she was still capable of making her own choices. So.
But again, the guardianship process is not an easy thing from what I understand.
That's true, and it's changed over the last several years because there were some situations in which guardians had many wards, and they weren't providing what we would want in the best interests of those people. So the guardianship process involves getting a background check as a part of your application to become guardian, getting, if possible, an expert opinion that the person is not competent, applying to the court, asking to be named as guardian of that person. The next of kin of that person need to be notified. Sometimes we have people who worry that somebody's just going to sweep in and get a guardianship, but that's not the way it works. Guardianship applications involve notifying next of kin. And then the court has to notify the person who we would call the ward, who would be subject to the guardianship, that that application has been filed, that they have a right to counsel, they have a right to an independent evaluation, and so forth. In the event all those things come together and the person is not capable of making their own decisions, they have no documents that are less restrictive means, like a healthcare power of attorney or a general power of attorney, and the court finds that the person who's applied is the appropriate person, then they will give them authority to make decisions on behalf of that person.
And how long typically does that whole process take?
Weeks to months, depending on circumstances. Mm-hmm.
So getting a healthcare power of attorney would be a way easier thing to do.
It can be, yeah, that's true. And then you're the one choosing, right? Mm-hmm. So if you haven't executed those documents, you're not choosing who applies to be your guardian.
Right.
There can be some benefits of the guardianship, though. So if you apply to be guardian of a person and you're named guardian, you're given that authority. You're actually an agent for the court. The court is the superior guardian. So sometimes what we think of as the hassle of having to report to the court, having to give a guardianship plan, and all of those things are protections for you as well, because maybe the family says, what happened to dad's money? Mm-hmm. If you're the guardian, you're reporting the expenditure of every penny. And so in that situation, sometimes people will tell me the guardian's stealing mom's money, and I'd say, having a guardianship is the worst way to be a thief, because the court is making sure you account for every penny.
Because you would think, I would be afraid that someone would get a guardianship just so they could spend all the person's money.
No. In fact, most of the time a guardian is going to be bonded. They'll have an insurance policy for the case where they would misuse the money, and that would protect the interests of the ward. So that's a good thing. Yeah. Sometimes we don't want the court supervision. But if we don't have a person that we feel comfortable will protect our interests, guardianship can do that.
So Dave, why would you want to avoid a guardianship?
Well, a lot of people want to avoid a guardianship because the court involvement is an open process, involves a finding publicly that the person is incompetent, requires a bunch of other process in terms of accounting for assets, being bonded. If I know that I want my spouse or my oldest child to be guardian and make my choices if I can't, I should do that planning ahead of time. In the event that I don't have someone, maybe it is a good thing that the court's overlooking whoever that decision maker becomes.
Absolutely. No, I know it. There was a person in our office at one time that actually was guardian for someone, and I know spent a lot of time reporting and checking in and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting mix because some people abused a status as guardian as a money-making thing. And it happened in a couple of the larger municipal areas. The laws have changed, and then the way that we employ a guardianship requires that you show that you're looking to essentially try and give that ward the best life that ward can based on their limitations. So it was a problem that wasn't as widespread as you'd think, but the solution to that was pretty good because you're required to have a plan for that person, not just pay their bills and make sure they're not a danger to themselves.
And I know that this person had to go see them, a certain number of times, make sure checking in, and I thought that was great.
Absolutely.
Instead of just I bid and I don't even talk to the person.
Yeah, and that can happen. So, in the case that we have situations though where people don't apply for guardianship, and somebody may be abusing a senior with healthcare power of attorney and general power of attorney. So in those cases, we just hope that they get picked up by somebody. So that may be Adult Protective Services, that may be those type of circumstances. But sometimes it's a little late.
And unfortunately, there's a few bad people, lots of good people, but trying to put in guardians.
Yeah, so the guardianship process, it's much more difficult as guardian to act in a way that is exploitive of the ward. If you have a power of attorney, a healthcare power of attorney, that's if that person that you've chosen is not the right person, then that's a lot easier situation in which to exploit them for money, or we had a case recently where the granddaughter of the person who had become incompetent had power of attorney and essentially kept grandma in the house when she shouldn't have been, because they were living there rent-free. They were using grandma's money to pay all the bills, and they kind of used it as a free ride. In that case, that wouldn't happen with a guardianship. So we think if we have a classic situation where we have the best people to choose, and obviously it makes sense to make those decisions ahead of time, in the absence of that, don't just choose anyone, because I'd rather have the court overlooking that type of circumstance.
Okay. Thank you for joining us for our legal chat. For any further information, please visit our website at GCCOA.org.